Welcome to World Prism. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. Picture this, it's 2025, and the biggest drama in Washington is unfolding at the Supreme Court. The showdown? President Trump's controversial tariffs. On one side, Trump claims he can tax imports solo. On the other, businesses and courts argue it's Congress's job. This isn't just legal jargon, it's about your wallet and America's global ties. The Supreme Court's decision will define presidential power limits. The question: does the 1977 IEPA law give Trump carte blanche to impose tariffs? Imagine your parents give you car keys for emergencies, and you use them for a kebab run. The courts are debating if Trump's tariffs are a similar overreach. As of October 16, 2025, the nation awaits the arguments, with a decision by year's end. This isn't just business news, it's a test of America's constitutional framework. It's about who writes the rules and the economic power a president can wield. The court's ruling will ripple through power corridors, markets, and wallets for years. It's a big one, folks. A really big one. Stay tuned, the implications of this decision are vast. It could reshape the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. Public opinion is divided, with some supporting the president's bold moves and others fearing an overreach of power. Historically, the Supreme Court has played a crucial role in defining the limits of presidential authority. This case will be no different, setting a precedent for future administrations. As we await the final verdict, one thing is clear: the outcome will shape the nation's political and economic landscape for years to come. Let's break down these tariffs. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. Trump's administration didn't hold back, targeting China and others with sweeping tariffs. The goal? Protect American industries and jobs and punish unfair trade practices. These weren't minor tariffs. They hit hundreds of billions in goods. Electronics, furniture, clothing, all became pricier. The idea was to make foreign goods costly, boosting American products. But everyone felt the pinch: companies, farmers, and families. The White House framed it as a national security fight. Trump argued it was about America's survival and independence. It was a powerful message for his supporters, a stand against globalization. But the costs were real and widespread. At the heart of this legal battle lies a fundamental question about the balance of power in American government. It's a classic constitutional tug-of-war, a struggle that has shaped the nation since its founding. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to tax, regulate commerce, and make laws that impact the nation's economy. Historically, Congress had to pass laws for broad import taxes, ensuring that major economic decisions were debated and voted on by elected representatives. But over time, especially during moments of crisis, Congress delegated some of its authority to the president, hoping for swift action when urgent threats arose. Enter the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, which gave the president broad emergency powers over commerce in times of national emergency. Decades later, President Trump's administration invoked IEPA, arguing that unfair trade practices by foreign nations, especially China, amounted to a national emergency that justified sweeping tariffs. Critics, however, saw this as a dangerous misinterpretation of the law, a power grab that bypassed Congress and threatened the system of checks and balances. The Supreme Court was called upon to decide whether the president's actions truly fit within the emergency powers granted by IEPA, or if they represented executive overreach. Was global trade competition a legitimate national emergency, justifying massive tariffs, or was it simply a policy disagreement that should have remained in Congress's hands? This case wasn't just about interpreting a single law, it was about the very principle of separation of powers that underpins American democracy. A ruling for Trump could dramatically expand executive power for future presidents, while a ruling against him would reaffirm Congress's vital role in shaping the nation's economic destiny. Before the case ever reached the Supreme Court, it had to pass through a series of lower federal courts, and those courts were not convinced by the administration's arguments. Judges at each level scrutinized the government's actions closely, questioning whether the executive branch had truly followed the law. Federal courts ultimately ruled that the administration had overstepped its authority, finding that the president's actions went beyond what Congress had allowed. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit emphasized that the power to impose taxes and tariffs is a responsibility given to Congress, not the president alone. The judges also pointed out that the emergency powers granted by IEPA The International Emergency Economic Powers Act have clear limits and cannot be used to bypass Congress's authority. Imposing broad tariffs on imports, they said, was never the intention of the law. The courts noted that IEEPA was designed for targeted, temporary measures in times of crisis, not sweeping economic changes. The court's decision was a strong rebuke against what they saw as executive overreach, sending a clear message about the separation of powers. At the heart of the case was the question of how much authority the president truly has under IEEPA, especially when it comes to making major economic decisions. The lower courts made it clear. IEEPA could not be used as a tool for broad trade policy changes, and the president's powers were not unlimited. When the case finally reached the Supreme Court, the justices agreed with the lower court's reasoning and conclusions. The Supreme Court concluded that the president lacked the unilateral authority to impose such sweeping tariffs without explicit approval from Congress. This ruling became a landmark moment for American trade policy and the ongoing balance of power between the branches of government. Ultimately, the decision reaffirmed Congress's central role in shaping economic policy, ensuring that no single branch could act alone in matters that affect the entire nation's economy. Let's talk money. The tariffs collected $158 billion for the U.S. Treasury. Trump claimed future benefits of $4 trillion from tariffs and reduced debt interest. A ruling against the tariffs wasn't just legal defeat, it was a fiscal earthquake. Overturning them could eliminate $2.8 trillion in projected revenue by 2035. Lawmakers would face tough choices: raise taxes or cut spending. The issue of refunds loomed large. If tariffs were illegal, $158 billion might need refunding. This would be a logistical nightmare and financial drain. The justices faced a tough decision: legal principles versus economic chaos. The case was a classic principle versus pragmatism. The sheer money involved ensured it wasn't a simple decision. The stakes were enormous. While debates raged, Americans lived with tariff consequences daily. Tariffs are a hidden tax on American life. Goldman Sachs found U.S. consumers bore 55% of tariff costs. Businesses absorbed 22%, while foreign exporters paid 18%. Families faced rising living costs. The Supreme Court's decision promised relief. Tariff removal could lower import costs and prices. Businesses faced higher production costs, delaying investments and layoffs. The ruling brought relief to boardrooms, promising stability. It was a victory for free trade and struggling industries. Some domestic industries faced renewed competition. But for most, the end of tariffs was a welcome development. The Supreme Court's decision marks a pivotal moment for American governance. By ruling against unilateral tariffs, power shifts back to Congress. It reaffirms that economic policy should be decided by elected representatives. The decision limits executive authority, reinforcing separation of powers. It impacts U.S. engagement with the world, introducing stability. Trade policy will be more deliberate, requiring congressional legislation. This could repair alliances and rebuild trust. For families and businesses, relief from tariff-induced price pressures is likely. The trade debate continues, but the legal battleground has shifted. The case highlights checks and balances' importance. The future of trade policy depends on government navigation. The court reset the rules, ensuring democratic deliberation answers big questions.